Throughout Brawl Stars history, Edgar has always stood as some of the laughingstock of the community. So why is that the case? The moment you step foot into the player base, you immediately get a sense of Edgar's reputation as a brawler. Toxic, low skill, and brain dead are just a few of the words coming to mind when the average Brawl Stars player hears Edgar's name. How did Edgar's history contribute to his legacy as one of the most hated brawlers? And why did Edgar become the vessel for complaints about toxic players? Today, I'm going to cover a brief history of Edgar's origins, reputations, and places in the meta since his introduction, and how Edgar rose to be one of the most misunderstood brawlers in the entire game. That means there's no place to start than December 13th, 2020, when Edgar was announced for release during the 2020 Brawler Days alongside Byron. Joining Colette as the second brawler in the gift shop trio, Edgar was showcased to be an assassin brawler of the epic rarity. Leaping over walls, automatic supercharging, squishy but with lifesteal, Edgar was looking to be one of the few true assassin brawlers at the time. Prior to Edgar's release, there were only 4 assassins in the entire game. Crow basically doesn't count, and while Daryl was sometimes referred to as the rolling assassin by Supercell, he was always categorized as a heavyweight in-game. Therefore, alongside Leon and Mortis, Edgar was joining a pretty exclusive club. No ands, buts, or ifs, Edgar was undeniably a pure assassin. People didn't really kick up a fuss about this one. Oftentimes, the brawl talk alone gets people stressing over how broken the new brawler's gonna be. But Byron and Edgar both seem to resemble other brawlers already, namely Poco with his Da Capo star power and El Primo. And keep in mind, at this time, the community was less skeptical of broken brawler releases since we just hadn't had as many at this point. All in all, these brawlers looked pretty balanced, leading to not much community backlash, if any at all. People were excited for the Brawler Days update, and it seemed like everything was gonna turn out just perfectly. Edgar was even announced to be a free brawler. Look at that, free rewards for the community. And with that, on December 19th, 2020, Edgar was released as part of the Brawler Days update. There was just one problem. Edgar was everywhere. Yeah, you know that teeny tiny detail I mentioned about Edgar being free? This turned out to be a huge problem for matchmaking for a few days. Literally everyone was using Edgar and everyone was playing the new update, so much so that even the servers crashed for a few hours. Edgar made a strong impression being so accessible and basically flooding every game mode. While he wasn't as solid as Byron in 3v3, because that guy was a busted support on release, he still carried out that assassin role so well in every game mode, countering squishy brawlers and sharpshooters better than anyone else in the meta. And that was largely thanks to one thing: Let's Fly. This gadget basically allowed Edgar to fully charge his super in 3 seconds. There was no kiting all game like with Crow and Leon. Edgar could just get straight to assassinating 3 times per match whenever he wanted. Not to mention that Edgar would usually recharge his super by sacking another brawler anyway, and he passively recharged it in the first place. This assassin would basically have his super on hand at all times during a match. It was brutal and really strong. This was when the hate for Edgar really started. The fact that a brawler that was strong and easy to use was given to everyone caused a lot of frustration within the community. Edgar's assassin playstyle encouraged reckless attacks and selfish behavior from inexperienced players, leading to a lot of low IQ plays that really caught under the player base's skin, especially since at this time, a lot of these spammy, uncoordinated plays would end up working. This eventually led to a fateful day on January 14th, 2021, when Edgar's Let's Fly gadget finally received its nerf. Painful for Edgar, but entirely justified, honestly. So much of Edgar's kit relied on this one gadget. Now, instead of fully charging Edgar's super in 3 seconds, Let's Fly would mostly charge Edgar's super in 4 seconds. This gave Edgar just a little bit of downtime in between chaining supers, which which was really necessary for limiting his mobility and snowballing. Throughout the next few months, Edgar would receive a series of nerfs that would dig him deeper and deeper into competitive irrelevancy. In February 2021 came a nerf to Edgar's supercharge rate from attacks. In March came a nerf to Edgar's health. Edgar wouldn't receive another balance change for a few months, but this series of nerfs left Edgar in the dust of the competitive meta. Top players began learning how to counter Edgar's playstyle. They learned how to position themselves to stop Edgar from assassinating them, slowly pinching Edgar and his teammates since Edgar couldn't contribute from a distance and was so frail. Pro players slowly came off Edgar in competitive, and content creators started rating Edgar lower and lower on tier lists and rankings. So why did everyone still keep using him? Edgar was still so popular because he was fun to play, widely accessible, and still extremely dangerous at lower levels. Sure, the pros were figuring out how to counter Edgar, but your average Joe Schmoes at 400 trophies still got swept by Edgar really often. This was the start of what I call Edgar's mid-ladder menace arc. This term is mostly used for Clash Royale, but I think it applies really well here. While Edgar was slowly sinking into irrelevancy at the pro level, Edgar in the middle of trophy ladder was still thriving. According to a Reddit user, even after 3 consecutive months of nerfs, Edgar was still tied for having the top pick rate in April 2021. As such, even though Edgar had grown considerably weaker by this point, the complaints didn't stop. While Edgar's strength was a part of the hate rolling out with his release, a lot of it came down to his playstyle. While fun for the player, the way Edgar's inherent mechanics work don't exactly encourage the most skillful aspects of the game. There's no aiming like with most brawlers, and although positioning and movement with Edgar does take a lot of skill at the top level of the game, that's usually not necessary in regular ladder. Edgar still has great access to his super even after the nerfs to his Let's Fly gadget, meaning he could still get away with average movement in regular ladder due to this forgiving mechanic. This put even less respect on Edgar's playstyle than other melee brawlers at the time like Mortis and BB, who usually took a little more finesse to reach enemies. Edgar's low skill floor made him a magnet for low skill players. Edgar became the poster child of the bad random. This only encouraged the hate Edgar received. So many memes popped up about Edgar's place in the game as a low-skill brawler for bad randoms. When Edgar mains succeeded, it was seen as toxic, but when Edgar mains failed, they were seen as trash and noobs. Edgar had now landed in a weird spot. He was in the classic mid-ladder menace scenario of being too poor and competitive to be viable, but too overused and casual to be buffed back into viability. Supercell had to settle for Edgar not being a viable competitive option in fear of the community getting even more annoyed by this assassin. A few welcome changes came Edgar's way following his series of nerfs, however. These included his new hardcore gadget, which gave him a bulkier alternative to Let's Fly that helped with his low HP, as well as a buff to his lifesteal, but neither were enough to fill the holes dug into Edgar's kit. While Edgar did find some use as a last pick in Power League draft, being able to counter select team comps, he was still too niche to be anywhere near meta. After his last small buff in August of 2021, Edgar wouldn't receive another balance change for a year and a half. When a buff did come, it was in the form of reverting Edgar's health nerf, bringing him back to his original 3000 base HP in April of 2023. When this had no effect on his relevance, Supercell buffed his HP again to 3300 in May, but it was still nowhere near bringing Edgar back. Why was this the case? By the numbers, Edgar shouldn't really be much worse than he was when he was first meta. The problem was that too much time had passed. In the past 2 years, brawlers had kept getting stronger. So many new brawlers were added to the game, and this only expanded the number of counters to Edgar's kit. While Edgar stayed the same, the meta surrounding him evolved to do an even better job of surpassing him. There were so many new assassin counters that ruined Edgar's matchup chart, and even new assassins like Fang and Buzz made Edgar's one special role something obsolete. On October 24th, 2023, some of Edgar's latest buffs came in the form of stat improvements to his hardcore gadget and hard landing star power. These changes had virtually no impact on Edgar's stance in the competitive meta. At this point, it was cemented that Supercell had accepted Edgar's fate as a mid-ladder menace type brawler. They couldn't afford to buff Edgar any further because hate and complaints still came Edgar's way, even while he was at the bottom of the meta. So Supercell allowed Edgar to slowly fade into competitive irrelevancy. And then Hypercharge happened. Hypercharge had a way of absolutely breaking the game. Low tier brawlers shot up the tier list as soon as they got their Hypercharge, and the meta experienced some serious growing pains. Supercell needed to make Hypercharges powerful to get people excited about them, but unfortunately, this came at the cost of seriously hurting brawlers without a Hypercharge. Edgar was in this club for a short while until finally receiving his Hypercharge Outburst on December 12th, 2023. Nearly 3 years after Edgar was released, and over 2.5 years since Edgar has had any competitive relevancy. And to everyone's surprise, Edgar flew too close to the sun. After not being meta for over 2.5 years, Edgar, for a few days, became maybe the best brawler in the game. This Hypercharge was busted, doubling Edgar's supercharge rate and reload speed, allowing Edgar to basically chain infinite supers, infinite attacks, and infinite lifesteal healing. This was helped by the fact that Edgar's Let's Fly gadget also charged Edgar's Hypercharge, letting him get into his broken Hypercharge state more often. He also had significant 25% shield and damage boosts, giving Edgar even more healing and expanding his pool of good matchups. TLDR, it was broken. Supercell delivered an emergency nerf to Edgar, something most of the community couldn't have imagined ever happening to him. On December 18th, 2023, Edgar's Hypercharge multiplier decreased from 40% to 25%. However, Edgar still remained a high tier brawler after this change and actually enjoyed this treatment for another 2 months. Finally, after years of Edgar remained starving and settling for scraps, Edgar was competitively viable again. This Hypercharge allowed him to regain his ability to do his whole job effectively: assassinate. For a long period of time, Edgar simply wasn't good enough at assassinating brawlers, but with his Hypercharge, Edgar could finally win the matchups that he should. It also helped a lot that at this point, most brawlers didn't have a Hypercharge at all. Edgar had access to an ability that most other brawlers didn't even have. It seemed like Supercell was finally throwing Edgar some bones, but this streak of fortune had a limited shelf life. On February 27th, 2024, Edgar's Hypercharge would receive a rework, bringing back his original Hypercharge multiplier of 40% in exchange for nerfing his shield and damage boosts and removing his Let's Fly gadget's feature of charging his Hypercharge. I could go into the specifics, but basically, when the dust settled, Edgar grew less viable due to these changes. Edgar's inevitable end to his run as a high-tier brawler was here. Following these changes, Edgar dropped to mid-tier, becoming a niche counterpick brawler once again. This is when Edgar faced a problem he was all too familiar with: Following his Hypercharge rework in late February of 2024, Edgar wouldn't see another balance change until late March of 2025, which was a simple change to his gadget cooldowns when gadgets were changed from having 3 uses to being cooldown based. In essence, Edgar hasn't received a real change since February 27th, 2024. Just as Edgar slipped into irrelevancy before by receiving no attention, Edgar sat on the sidelines again as he watched other brawlers receive their hypercharges. Power creep had crippled Edgar once more. With each update that brought a new batch of hypercharges, Edgar's small advantage of having a hypercharge grew less and less special. And now, as of today, Edgar remains a low-tier competitive brawler. I know I've been talking about Edgar's competitive status throughout a large portion of this video, but that's because Edgar's casual status has remained fairly consistent his whole journey. Edgar still gets clowned on for terrorizing low to mid ladder. While not to the same extent due to the volume of brawlers nowadays, I think Edgar still maintains his reputation of being a toxic, low skill mid ladder menace. Even while being completely unviable for most of his lifespan, Edgar finds himself the joke of this community just because of the way he's played, garnering no sympathy from the player base. As for my thoughts, I've honestly enjoyed Edgar's playstyle ever since he first came out. It's a guilty pleasure of mine, and it's a shame no one can be proud to say that anymore considering Edgar's reputation. Because underneath all those sweaty comments and rage quits, I'm sure most of these players would admit to themselves that Edgar is fun to play. That's why their bad randoms play Edgar, and that's why casual players enjoy Edgar so much. Which, isn't having a low skill, really fun brawler to play healthy for Brawl Stars? To me, Edgar has some really fun mechanics to his kit. Even though he's far from my favorite brawler, his high mobility, role as an assassin, and risks that come with his low health make him a really fun brawler to try to outmaneuver people with. And yes, I will admit it does hurt to have Edgar teammates in 3v3 ranked, but none of those things are really Edgar's fault. His fun, easily accessible playstyle just happened to have the side effect of attracting bad players, causing a lot of frustrations for his teammates. It's unfortunate that Edgar was put into this situation and is mostly relegated to being a mid-ladder menace for most of his history. So, what do you think? Does Edgar truly deserve the hate, or is he just misunderstood? I'll see you soon. Maybe next week when I cover the history of the brawler that never should have been meta, but was.